Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I am Uday Bhaskar. This week, we review a rather opaque and complex subject, civil-military relations in India. Some tenets merit recall. One, that in a liberal democracy, the elected political representative is the symbol of the people's will and choice and is deemed supreme. And secondly, the military remains subordinate to, but is not subservient to the civilian political establishment. And the subtext is that a professional and apolitical military provides the core stability for the kinetics and on occasion the pyretics of the democratic experience to thrive. Post-colonial nations have their own cross to bear, and in a nascent democracy, the newly elected civilian leadership is often wary of the military. Coups by the military are a familiar pattern, and both Asia and Africa have been afflicted by this seizure of political power by the uniformed fraternity. India has been the exception in the South Asian context, and the Indian military has remained steadfastly apolitical. The transition from an imperial military that was fighting for the British Empire to that of a free India wedded to the democratic ethos is a remarkable transmutation and testimony to the character of the Indian civilian and military leadership. However, during the early decades after independence, Prime Minister Nehru remained wary of the Indian military, and his uncritical loyalty to then Defence Minister Krishna Menon, even at the risk of damaging national security, is illustrated. The 1962 war with China was perhaps the tragic manifestation of this civil-military dissonance. The ideal relationship is often referred to as quote-unquote objective civilian control over the military. However, in India, an anomalous situation prevails. There is little or no engagement between the political apex and the military top brass. Civil-military relations are mediated through the bureaucracy, and many unresolved issues have been allowed to fester. In short, civil-military relations in India are in need of objective review and repair. To discuss this, as always, we have an eminent panel. Allow me to introduce Mr. Vijay Singh, a former Defence Secretary, Admiral Arun Prakash, a former Chief of Naval Staff, and Professor Dipankar Gupta, a well-known academic and commentator. If I could turn to you first, Mr. Vijay Singh, with your experience in the MOD, would you like to characterize the texture of civil-military relations in India now?
I think that what is referred to as civil-military relations in most cases comes down to the higher management of defense in India, which is really the relationships that exist at the level of government, the government of India, with its military. And I would say that relationship, for all its occasional dissonances, has withstood many tests and could be described as generally harmonious, though there is often cause for dissatisfaction, and occasionally that is voiced publicly. As far as civil-military relations generally go in a broader way, there is no question that the public of India holds the military in the highest esteem, and we see it manifested across the length and breadth of this country, that the armed forces actually enjoy a standing, prestige and credibility that perhaps no other institution in this country has. And I think that that's an important factor in the relations at the highest level, and a reason why the military continues to be treated respectfully in spite of occasional provocations now and then.
So your characterization and assessment is that harmonious, and of course, as far as civil society is concerned, the institution is held in the highest esteem. I'll ask you, Admiral Prakash, if I may, would you share this view that it is harmonious? And he hasn't said it, but he's suggesting that it is satisfactory at the levels of higher defense management.
Well, it depends on how you perceive civil-military relations. Mr. Vijay Singh, of course, is looking at it from a different point of view. but it is harmonious, no doubt, and especially with people like Mr. Vijay Singh himself, who's been a very fine civil servant. Person-to-person relationships possibly are harmonious, but the question is it an effective system, and will it work when we go to war? This social scientist Samuel Huntington has said that national security is in fact all about creating a good functional relationship, civil-military relationship, and countries which don't pay enough attention to this rather complex paradigm are bound to suffer. And there's good reason for saying this, because at present we are following a system which was bequeathed to us by the British. In fact, Lord Ismay was the person who evolved this, and it was patterned on the paradigm which was in position in UK at that time. Now, in the 70 years that have elapsed since then, UK has evolved. Their system has evolved 3 or 4 times, drastic changes there, so that today, with that system of higher defense management and national security, the UK can fight a 21st century war. I'm afraid that is not true for us, because we are still stuck in a time warp. Relations may be harmonious, but the system is not effective. And if we come to that point, I will point out the areas in which
I'll come back to you in a moment, Admiral Prakash, because I recall once you had written about this, saying that if you look at the current lattice of governance, the 3 service chiefs are the equivalent of the invisible men, and the defense secretary has the responsibility. But I'll come back to that in a moment. Could I request you, Professor Gupta, when you look at civil-military relations in India from your perspective as an academic and someone who's looked at public policy in India, what Mr. Singh has said about the military as an institution and the high esteem that the citizen has for it, what is your own reading or assessment? Over the last few years, we've had a series of, shall we say, to put it mildly, convulsions as far as the system is concerned.
I have no doubt at all that the public holds the military in very high esteem, and for good reason. Even when the public is, in some difficulties because of various catastrophes, floods or whatever, even civil, military, political matters, and the military always comes out with flying colors. They've helped people, rescued people, done all kinds of things. But the funny part is that once it's done, and people forget. And one of the best indicators of whether or not the military actually enjoys a high esteem in the public eye is to look at it in terms of how many people really want to join the army or the Navy or the Air Force. I think that is the best indicator. I think the military or the armed forces in general, they're kind of used by the public. By the public, I mean the government officials and so forth. They're used from time to time simply to cover up their own inadequacies. They can't save people from a flood, they can't get people out of an earthquake, so they send the military over, where people who are obedient, well-trained, they do their job and come back. And that's it. But the appreciation of the military as an institution, I think, has to be upgraded. And if that were to happen, you wouldn't face a shortage of officers as you do today. I remember in my time, there were some of my colleagues who were very gifted, wanted to join the forces, the army, and if nothing worked out, then the police. But that is not true at all today. Nobody thinks of it. I mean, forget about the military. Nobody wants to join the IAS either. The government service in that sense. But the IAS still has a higher pecking order than the military does.
For a variety of reasons. But I'll come back to you about this, about
But I want to make one
Sure.
last point, that is this, that the military is used by civil officials, but not properly respected by them, though the people are helped, but that kind of memory is a very short memory.
Which I think is a larger institutional issue. But I'll come back to that. Mr. Vijay Singh, if I could ask you really to look at this, because one of the issues that often comes up in the course of these debates and discourses is that if you look at the way the government of India has listed its rules of business, I mean, you've been Defense Secretary, and it's often said that as per the book, the responsibility for the defense and security of India vests with the Defense Secretary and not with the 3 service chiefs. Now, did you find this anomalous, or is it something that you feel is part of the harmony that you were speaking about?
But I must confess that, I wasn't at all aware of that when I was Defense Secretary. I read about it perhaps for the first time in one of Admiral Arun Prakash's articles.
Yeah, he was one of the first to write about it.
And of course, if I had known it at that time, I'd have been scared out of my wits, really. But I'm not sure about that enumeration. But
no, it's factual. That much I know.
Yes,
we've all checked it out.
But I wouldn't, I wouldn't say that it reduces the chiefs in any way. And in all the conflicts that we have had, the chiefs have had the leading role. I mean, even the most recent one in Kargil, I don't think anyone tried to tell the chiefs what to do. And that holds for previous conflicts as well. So it's not true that, when it came to a real crisis and a crunch, that the bureaucrats had any role to play. I think that the decisions were taken between the political leadership and the military with no sort of intermediation by civil servants.
But do you mind if I press this point a little bit? As you said, you were perhaps not aware of it when you were Defense Secretary. But if this is indeed, as the rules of business are really sort of listed and detailed, wouldn't you say it's anomalous? Because you're right, when there is a war or an operational exigency, nobody expects a bureaucrat, a civil servant, to take on any of the professional responsibility. That's the chief's job. But shouldn't somebody have applied their mind and said that this needs to be tweaked or changed?
I haven't examined it closely. Obviously it's a kind of a formal enumeration, and I don't know how much should be read into it.
Sir, would you like to weigh in on this?
Yes. As once again, relations may be harmonious. A set of civil servants and a set of military men may get along well, and we've won all the wars we've fought, but that's good luck. Systemically, it's an incorrect system, and just like him, while I was in service, I wasn't aware of this. So to that extent, I think my generation and my predecessors have been naive that we've lived with a system which is iniquitous, that the Defense Secretary has a role to play, a very important role to play, but so do the military chiefs. The rules, the Government of India rules of allocation of business and transaction of business make no mention of the three chiefs, nor of the vice chiefs, nor of the principal staff officers. So therefore, they have no locus standi in the edifice of the government.
You have a patent on the invisible men, right?
Thank you for granting it to me. But they have no locus standi, they have no financial powers. Today, a director in the Ministry of Defense can overrule a chief. So there are things to be done. So you have to recognize that the chief is not only the commander-in-chief, he goes into operations, the army chief administers 1.5 million men and billions worth of hardware on behalf of the Government of India and the people of India. So the government has to recognize this and put it down in writing. Everywhere else in the UK, the Defense Secretary, he's called the Permanent Under Secretary for Defense. He's the Chief Financial Officer. He makes policy. The military chiefs make strategy and military operations. In the United States, there is there's a set of rules which clearly define what role the Defense Department will play, what are the roles and duties and responsibilities of each of the 4 services that they have, of the chiefs or the commander-in-chiefs. But here we've left it, just left it vague and open, and so therefore it's a mess.
So there is a need to revisit this and review
this, because today we need to integrate. The critical issue is that we are living in compartments. The civilians live in the Ministry of Defense, the military men live in their headquarters. They talk to each other only on files, and each file movement takes weeks and months, so no decisions get taken.
But I just want to flag this and say that I know from my own personal sort of reading of this as a student that the Government of India and the entire system has been talking about this since the Kargil report of 2000. So 16 years later, we really haven't made any serious progress. But Dipankar, if I can ask you to comment on the larger issue of the military, while the institution is held in high esteem, as you pointed out, we also have the equivalent of that Nehruvian, shall we say, inheritance. The fact that the Indian military, he personally did not look at the institution with the kind of empathy, I would say, that, for instance, Sardar Patel had brought as far as the civil service was concerned. I mean, he recognized the need for the Indian civil service and the need to, quote unquote, make it compatible with free India. As an academic, as someone who is aware of, that particular part of our history, Pandit Nehru, Prime Minister Nehru's, I don't want to say disparaging, but he definitely was, shall we say, wary of the Indian forge. So what is your reading of that particular historical experience?
You're right. The term wary is the correct term, though I believe Krishna Menon was actually disparaging. And that Nehru allowed Krishna Menon to run the show was not a good idea at all. Besides, the wariness was totally misplaced. It was built on fears that came up to him from variety of quarters, particularly Pakistan, I think. But it was completely misplaced. The fact that the Indian Army stood by the British in spite of Netaji Bose and the Indian National Army, that should have been enough indication to any right-thinking politician that here you have a professional force. I'm not talking about a loyal force, a professional force whose job is to serve the country. And I think Nehru did a lot of damage to the army in this process. And I feel that the country as a whole has inherited that legacy. Somehow the army is to be suspected of larger...
almost like saying, keep them in the cantonment.
Yeah, larger ambitions. They're just sort of biding their time to take over, which is rubbish. The army has never had that ambition, ever. And I think that is to be one institution in a country which functions as an institution is, I think, the forces. They really function as an institution. The proper institution should do in terms of the delivery. I'm not talking about the relationship in the Ministry of Defense and the army, which is highly contentious. But in terms of delivery, is the most professionally focused group of people that I know of. And therefore, to see them as a threat to the nation state or threat to the political establishment is a figment of your imagination and fueled primarily by events in third world countries. That India is not that kind of a third world country. It is not that kind of a dependent democracy. That is very important. We should be confident enough about ourselves to give the army the respect it deserves.
But on this, Mr. Vijay Singh, if I could ask you to perhaps share your thoughts. I have again heard this, that when we had Mr. Vajpayee as the Prime Minister and the Kargil Committee report, we had the groups of ministers and so on, this whole question about the CDS and whether or not India should appoint a CDS, as reported in the media at that time, it was suggested that Prime Minister Vajpayee had consulted the former Prime Minister, Mr. Narasimha Rao, and there was this unstated kind of perception that perhaps this is not the time because it could lead to this anxiety about the coup. Now, as a very senior civil servant, did you ever come across this kind of a, shall we say, whisper, a perception that not desirable to have a CDS because it could lead to a coup?
For the sake of the audience, maybe you should
tell them what
CDS is.
As the Chief of Defence Staff, who would be over and above the current the three chiefs we have, who are 4-star, there was a suggestion that it could be a 5-star officer. But these are all proposals that have not really, I think, seen much progress. But what is your sense? Was there this anxiety about the coup?
Well, I must say that, in all my years as a civil servant, I never came across any anxiety or even discussion about a coup among civil servants or among our political leaders. So I would say that if that anxiety existed, it could have been in the early days after independence, but certainly not later. It wouldn't be correct to say that there's any fear of a powerful military. But as far as the CDS goes, I think that there were differences within the armed forces as well.
True.
From the Navy and the Air Force.
The Air Force had reservations for a long time.
That it would lead to the predominance of one service. The government dealt with it in its usual way. It said that every political party must be consulted before a decision like this is taken. So then letters went to every political party, and you wouldn't believe the large number of political parties that there are some which are perhaps
non-existent.
We recently had a listing because of this whole demonetization.
And I do remember that this matter, the Kargil Committee report and so on, it was reviewed at a high level. And the report was that, we can't really proceed because a particular party was mentioned to the fringe group in a particular part of India. They haven't responded. So I think that government was quite ready to put it on the shelf for as long as possible. And
one second, when you say government here, are you talking of the minister or the secretary?
I am talking actually of an empowered committee that was dealing with it at that time. So certainly there was no hurry to proceed with this. And I think the feeling was that this is an uncharted area. And that you will have sort of military jackboots all over South Block if you have this kind of person. And it doesn't seem to have changed very much, because it's something that could be done with the stroke of the pen, and government could just do it. It exists in other countries as well. I mean, everyone knows about the UK, for example, that it is done at a 4-star level. There are probably no 5 stars anywhere in the world now, and haven't been for a very long time.
Nor are they required.
For a very long time. It's only in India that we still talk of a 5-star CDS, which probably again scares people a bit. So I think that, you know...
So at the end of the day, would it be then fair to say that based on your experience, that this is an issue that the government of the day, in this case the Modi-led government, should be really revisiting and making some steps?
Well, it should be revisiting for the reasons that Admiral Arun Prakash pointed out, for just to be able to function better and more effectively. I mean, at present, the systems that we have, for example, it's not really so much civilian control, but a kind of tyranny by your financial advisors, who, as he says, can hold up a chief indefinitely. I mean, we've fought against those things as well. And some of those structures need to be
rewired or
well,
dismantled.
Absolutely, because there are functionaries at a relatively junior level who can stall very critical projects. And then hardly anyone in government has the courage to overrule in writing a financial point of view, because you don't know what might transpire at a later date. We thrive on suspicion here.
Oh, yes.
And also with a desire to settle scores at later dates.
At a later date. But Admiral Prakash, now in the, if we look at the way ahead, you've been a member of the Naresh Chandra Committee report, and more recently, the current government, the Defence Minister, Mr. Parikar, has also referred to the CDS. Do you think that these are the kind of changes we need, or do we need to really sort of rewire the whole system? We often talk about the CISC being part of the MOD, which is factually not true. But that seems to be the perception, that we have created these structures and they are part of the MOD. But factually, that is not what obtains on the ground. Is that right? Would that...
Absolutely right. And let me go back a step. If there is a war, and God forbid if there's a nuclear exchange, then it is the Prime Minister of the country who's actually the Commander-in-Chief. It's not the President, Supreme Commander. The President, the Prime Minister will take the crucial decisions, and he will tell the military to execute them or do whatever they want. And that's how it's been. Churchill fought the war virtually single-handed, Margaret Thatcher, but they did so with the military at their side.
Yeah.
So the Indian Prime Minister also must be in a situation where he can call upon his military advisors to advise him in times of war and certainly in times of peace. So therefore he must be comfortable with his chiefs, and all the better if he has a single point source of military advice, and that's the whole argument behind having a Chief of Defence Staff. But if there is suspicion, or if there is a layer of civil servants with whom the politician feels more comfortable, not their fault, he's more comfortable with the civil servants than with uniformed people, then he'd rather have civil servants next to him than military. So that's what's happening here. So it's an chicken and egg situation, because if you put a single point source of advice, let me also come back to this 5-star, 4-star business. They say that the bureaucracy feels threatened by a 5. There is no need to have a 5-star. In fact, the single point source of military advice should be exactly on par with the civilian, which is the Defence Secretary. So if we ever create a CDS or a permanent chairmanship, then we should upgrade this Defence Secretary so that both are absolutely on par. There is no threat, because they are two arms of the same body. So, and the other point is that unless you put in place either a Chief of Defence Staff or a permanent Chairman Chief of Staff, the whole
edifice,
not only the whole process will not start.
So that's really the starting point, as you
no matter how difficult or how alien it may sound, you have to put in place a single point source of military advice, and in partnership with the Defence Secretary, who is a single source point of policy. And
so the CDS may be a starting point.
It has to be the starting point of any change that the national security badly needs.
I hope I can come back to you and all of you on the same subject, but due to paucity of time, maybe we'll revisit this. And what it does seem to suggest is that a review of the last 70 years, if you look at most democracies, the military has an uneven relationship both with the political establishment and civil society, as our discussion had pointed out. The military is not the first choice in the 21st century for young men and women, and it does appear that the more privileged upper strata of society is looking at other options. The profession of arms and the laying down of one's life for flag and honor is gradually losing the mass appeal it had in yesteryears. The received wisdom is that a conventional war of the kind that the 20th century witnessed is now a low and receding probability. Yet, no nation has converted the sword into the proverbial plowshare. Technology has also contributed to the changing nature of warfare per se, and the profile of the military as an institution is changing. Cyber and space capabilities are now part of the spectrum of composite military power. And when we talk about threats, it is the non-state actor and terrorism and so on. The soldier in years to come will be far more technologically qualified than what was the norm till recently. Against such a backdrop, the need to ensure that the military is appropriately incorporated into the lattice of governance and also within the fabric of civil society is imperative. This is a challenge for India as also an opportunity. Samuel Huntington had outlined the holy grail as objective civilian control of the military by the political leadership. The basis for this interface must be one of empathy for the military as an institution by the politico-bureaucratic combined, and the military in turn must be seen to be adhering to its own code of conduct, fidelity to flag and constitution, and imbued with honor, valor and selflessness. The Modi government has identified civil-military relations as a priority area, and one hopes that the necessary structural changes will be introduced soon. On that note, allow me to thank my guests, Mr. Vijay Singh, Admiral Arun Prakash, and Professor Dipankar Gupta. And thank you for watching Security Scan. Goodbye.